before I get started here, I'd like to thank Navionics for giving me the opportunity to do one of these webinars here. It's really a good opportunity for me to do more than I could do in a seminar that I would do in a trade show or whatever. I can actually talk to you guys about my mindset, show you some things, and hopefully point you in the right direction. So this one here is about offshore fishing strategies for private boaters. This isn't going to be, hey, go here, do this. So keep your minds kind of open for this whole thing. There's a lot of theory involved and reasons why I'm doing things. So to understand why anything happens in Southern California, we have to understand the bigger picture. And in this case, it's the Pacific Ocean. We're in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. But what we're doing is not isolated from the rest of the expanse of that body of water. And these bluefin tuna that we catch here, or that we've been catching, they're coming from Japan. So over here, you can see in Japan, these things are spawning in the Sea of Japan, which is right above Kuroshio, or whatever this is right here. Pardon my lack of pronunciation. And these fish travel across the Pacific to where we're at, and there's been records of them going twice in 1 year on a tagged fish. But what's more important here is this current. So this is called the North Pacific Gyre, which is a clockwise current that runs from Japan up above the Alaska, up towards the Alaska current, down the west coast of California, or the United States, which is considered the California current. And then, hold on, I'm getting a question here. My boss here. You only see the camera. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Let me back up again. Can you guys see the screen now? Are you guys see the PowerPoint? Anyone please respond? Do we see PowerPoint? Standing by here, and I have to click out of it to get the answer here. Okay, I'm not seeing any PowerPoint. Okay. So let me go back up here. Sorry about this, guys. Sharing my screen. Main screen. PowerPoint. Did that work? Okay, stand by here. I apologize. Okay, now we got it, right? Now you guys see my screen? All right, I apologize. I haven't done this in a while. Scrolling through 8,000 messages here. Okay, you can see the PowerPoint. Thank you very much. Are we good now? One more person. Can you guys see the thing? All right, great. Back to it. So what I'm talking about here is we have this North Pacific Gyre. Sorry about that, by the way. This is a clockwise rotation that goes through the entire Northern Pacific. It runs from Alaska down to California coast, down into Mexico, down to the equator, back to Japan, and around in a circle. This is important because this water movement affects everything that happens here in California, and knowing the bigger picture explains a lot of the reasons why this is happening. So, as you saw that California current coming around in the clockwise direction, I've done quite a bit of study on government charts and oceanographics, whatever, that show how this California current interacts with our coastline. So this blue arrow here shows the California current, and that is I'm going to back up a page here, that is the right-hand thing of that bigger North Pacific Gyre. So that's what's happening. This huge clockwise movement of water is coming down our coast. When that movement of water hits Point Conception, it's interrupted, because Point Conception, if you know the topography of California, sticks out quite a way. And we're in the Southern California Bight, which, imagine a bight literally taken out of California. That's where we're at. So what happens is California current creates an eddy, and it comes into different places in a different angle. Like it comes in between Point Conception and Channel Islands, Anyone who's ever driven there through the summer knows that while there's downhill current, there's also uphill current, which makes a very rough crossing from Ventura to the Channel Islands, and that's because of that California current. Also, it comes in between them, the Channel Islands and San Nick, and also between San Nick and San Clemente, and it also comes in below San Clemente. One of the things that we factor into is which is agreed, is our Southern California countercurrent, which is a counterclockwise current that during the winter runs. It's called the Davidson current. It's much stronger. During the summer, it also runs along our coast, and it's part of this bigger oscillation of water in there. And much like if you ever seen a Catalina eddy spin into the Southern California bight, where you have the southeast wind in the morning along the coast, it's nice from the outside, but cloudy, where the water does the same thing the air does. So what happens is, as this current comes in and spins around, it creates eddies of water that are in very predictable places. And what I'm going to show you here is this is a good example of something that happens every summer at San Clemente Island. What you see here is this uphill current, which is part of that California countercurrent, comes up the Clemente Ridge from the 43, and it spins along the front side of Clemente and the back side of Clemente. And the reason it spins along the front side of Clemente is because it hits the mackerel bank. On the back side of Clemente, it hits the area known as Desperation Reef, which, not surprisingly, is where a lot of those big bluefin tuna stack up throughout the year. But what happens here is this current comes up and it creates these eddies. And what do these eddies look like? This SST chart right here shows this red mark here is an eddy in the lee of Clemente, right where you can see here where my pointer is where the mackerel bank is, and that spins back and creates that. Now, this isn't warm water. This is a sea surface temperature chart. So this is dirty water. But that dirty water is dirty because it's upwelled nutrients that have gotten into an eddy there and collected, which absorb sunlight, create plankton, which feeds bait fish and down the road tuna, marlin, whatever you want. So it's this water movement that we need to pay attention to and understand. I know it's pretty advanced stuff, for lack of a better term, but understanding why these things happen is the key to understanding where to go when you're out fishing. So if we back up, we look, so this current is coming uphill. It's running along this canyon. The reason so what happens is current flows, the ocean is always flowing. It might be flowing at a quarter knot, a half knot, but whatever, it's moving. And what happens here on the Clemente Ridge is that we have dramatic depth change here. So we have 4,000 feet of water on one side of it, and we have 1,300 feet of water there. That means that if you're putting your thumb over the end of the garden hose and speeding up that water by this depth change. So that funnels it up the front side of the island, creates this gyre, or this eddy, for lack of a better term, so I got to back up here a second. I apologize, I'm a little scattered today. I fished all day, I'm a little tired. So what happens is with these, anywhere you interact with depth change, is that the nutrient-rich water that's cold, that's down deep, gets pushed to the surface. Those nutrients interact with sunlight, and that's the process of primary production. And what happens there is that it turns inert things into something that something else can eat. It could be algae, it could be plankton. You think about all the red tide we have right now. That's edible stuff for fish. So that in turn aggregates filter feeding fish, red crabs, bait fish, things like that, which in turn aggregate predatory fish. So going forward, so we have this patch of warm water here. Now that we know why that's there, we can move on and look at our SST chart. Now, there's a patch of warmer water in the same spot, and I'm putting my mouse over right now, where that chlorophyll concentration was. And the reason that dirty water gets warmer is because it's more opaque. And the opaque water absorbs heat and makes it warmer than the surrounding water. The mistake a lot of guys make, though, is they say, oh, I got a patch of warm water here. But if that patch of warm water is created by chlorophyll, the water, 5 feet down, it's just as cold as everywhere else. So it's like a false positive on the test. And you would think, hey, there's this 70-degree water off East End of Clemente. Why are there no tuna in it? Because it's 58 degrees, 20 feet down. It's no different than any of the other water around it. So what we're looking for with chlorophyll is in this area over here, away from that dark spot. This is all fairly clean water. So basically with the chlorophyll chart, the darker the blue, the cleaner the water. Anything light blue is okay. Greens are lightly off color, yellows, reds, that's fairly off color water. That's why you see a lot on the coast. But in here, there's no change in chlorophyll. So all that water is the same color. So if I look here, I see edges. Now these edges don't represent color changes like the other one did. Those represent temperature changes. So the red water is obviously warmer. This is an old picture. So it doesn't really matter what the actual numbers are. Orange water is cooler. The areas that are blue are just where the clouds were blocking the view. But basically, you see these hard edges of color change, which means there's a hard temperature change here and also up here below Catalina. So I've highlighted them there. So that's what we would call an edge. That's a hard temp break. That means usually the two currents are opposing, which means that a current is going one direction and another current is going the other direction and creating that hard line of warm water, as opposed to a more gradual change of water like we see in this part of the screen here. So these hard edges are important because they aggregate bait fish because there's a current break there, which will cause plankton and other things like that to build up in that edge. If you're driving, you see a bunch of kelps in the line or scraps of kelp, that's on a current break, and that current break tends to draw bait fish because they feed on the things that get trapped in the eddies created by that, and then fish will go along with it. But as you can see, these hard edges, they're associated directly with ridges. So this bottom one that's down here in Mexican waters and up to above the corner is directly related to this topographical feature you can see on your chart. As this one up here, if you go back to the top, this hard line is right on the edge of the 152, 277 drop off of Catalina. So the reason that this is important is because we know that topographical changes create currents that aggregate plankton and bait fish, and by association could aggregate tuna, yellowtail, dorado, whatever's going to be on a kelp patty, those types of things, because the topographical changes are causing that to happen. So when we go out, a lot of times, I love an SST chart like this or a chlorophyll shot like this here, but we have June gloom and overcast and all this other stuff. There's a lot of days where my SST chart looks like this. I mean, there's nothing to show. So what do you do? I mean, it's like, hey, I have no information. I have no overview. I have no anything. I'm going to pause for a second here to check if I have missed any questions, so bear with me. Getting a lot of yeses. Sorry, I got to check in periodically. The way it's set up is not. Okay, so here's a good question in relation to that. What is a good temperature break? 0.5 degree, 2 degree. Any sudden temperature change is a good temperature change. I fished bass at Palos Verdes today, and as we were driving, there's a lot of current going on, uphill current, downhill current. We had a 6 degree temperature change from one side of the Point Metsana to the other, and that means that there's two different waters coming up against one another. And while we're not fishing tuna there, any significant sharp change where you can actually watch your temperature go up and down is a good hard change. And it's not always the warmer. I've had plenty of times, especially these bluefin, where a 2 or 3 degree or even 1 degree change to the cooler might indicate that, hey, I'm in the right spot. I'm not concerned so much about what the water temp is. I'm concerned about what's creating that temperature differential, and usually that's a current break. So going back here, we have zero information. So I'm going to talk about an average trip, average day in the water to figure out what does all this mean. So the game plan. So I have priorities when I go out fishing. I think everybody should too. when I'm tuna fishing, my priorities are to drive through water that no one else is driving through. And that sounds simple enough, but if you guys fish out of San Diego a lot, you're the 25th boat to launch that morning, you're going to be driving through somebody else's water. So if I'm going to have a heavily used dock or launch ramp, I'll pull out of the harbor and drive up or down the coast 5 miles before heading off to look, because I don't want to drive through a bunch of water that everybody's driving through on their way to wherever. Actually, what I do, I take that to another extent. I mean, the last few years, I do all my fishing on Newport Beach. I drive a little further, but I have all virgin water to myself due to lack of people going through there. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So I'm going to look at as many temperature and color breaks as possible. If you have a good SST chart, chlorophyll chart, it's very easy to identify where those are, but that's not usually the case. And, unless you're in the fall when we have standing conditions or whatever. So we're going to talk about that as well. When I'm on the water, I'm going to pay attention to what the bait and the birds are telling me. So no matter how strong my game plan is leaving the dock, the second I'm fishing, I am going to be looking at different things. I mean, the way these tuna have been the last few years, I have gotten 3 miles out of Newport Harbor and completely changed my direction entirely based on what I'm seeing on the edge of the canyon. So here we go. Make decisions based solely on real-time observations. I recommend fish dope from BD Outdoors to anybody that has their own boat. And I also recommend using it like I do to say, hey, where were fish caught yesterday? And then making some choices as to where I might go catch those fish today. And I'll get more into that in a little bit, but that is really the basis of everything I do. See what happened, analyze it, make a prediction, and go with it. And the final piece of the puzzle is to put myself in the best possible place at the best possible time, which is going to relate to tides, and I'll talk about that in a second here as well. So this is I chose the East Butterfly because the last tuna trip I took in end of December last year, we tried to go there. It was too rough, and there was a bluefin caught out there by the day and a half trip. But I'm running, which is only 52 miles out of San Diego, but I'm running 83 miles out of Newport, and it was blowing southeast, capping southeast for the first, 60 miles. When we got to the 43, and it got too rough to go any further without running out of gas, so we ended up going home. But basically, backing up here a second, let's say they're biting at the East Butterfly or the 371 or any of the local banks, 425, any of these spots, the 43. If there are fish biting there, every boat that knows about it is going to go directly there in a straight line, the shortest course possible from San Diego to there, 52 miles. Great. You go there and you fish with every single person that heard that they were biting. And for me, that's just no fun at all. So what I do is, 52 miles, I'll drive 83 miles out of Newport. And while I'm adding, 31 more miles, I'm not sitting in traffic all the way to San Diego to do it. But while this is an idea that might work if you're dying to get down to the East Butterfly, it's not the most effective way to fish if you don't have any information for that 83 miles of water that you're driving through. And a lot of times during the summer, we just don't. Clouds prevent the satellites from seeing what's going on there. So I'm going to show you guys my actual game plan that I took every trip last year, and it worked out great for me. And, you can adjust it on your own depending on where you launch at it. But I want you to remember 83 miles in a straight line. So leaving out of Newport, I love running to the 277 because I can cut right across the 14-mile bank there in the middle. I clip the edge of the shipping lanes where I've caught many fish. And I can get to the 14 and stop, or I can get to the shipping lanes and stop, or the 277 and say, hey, I'm going to run up to 152. But as I'm driving, every time I get near something that's going to create a change in water direction, potentially like a bank or a ridge, I'm going to stop and look. And stopping and looking can be as simple as, hey, we're just coming onto the 14 here. Let's get the gyros out. Let's glass around for a second. Ocean's empty. Keep going. But let's say we're getting to the edge of the shipping lanes here. Now I'm starting to see more birds than I was seeing, or I'm starting to see some dolphin, or the water temperature change. Now, water temperature change when you're going blind is the one thing you're looking for. If I'm driving, I got to back up here and say, the minute I leave the dock when I'm fishing offshore, I set my fish finder to 200 feet and I keep an eye on it. And if I watch as I'm driving and I see a temperature change of a degree or anything like that, I will slow down to 10 knots for 5 minutes and I will look at my fish finder and see if I'm seeing a bait. If I'm seeing bait, I will get out the glasses and look and see if I'm seeing any birds. What are those birds doing? Are there rafts of shearwaters? Are there terns high flying? Or anything like that? If it looks interesting, we all know what interesting birds look like. I will stop and spend 20 or 30 minutes in that area looking. If I see a temperature break, but the watercolor is the same color and there's no sign of bait or no sign of life other than that, I'll just keep going. Now, as I run here, I'll do that in every known spot that has a big difference in contour and just give it 2 or 3 minutes just to look. And eventually you're going to start to see something. You're going to say, hey, I saw a lot of birds and a lot of bait here at the 277, for example. No signs of tuna, no signs of life. I'm going to put that in the back of my brain and say, I've got a high tide in 3 hours. If I don't see anything else, that's where I want to be back. You want to put yourself in the best place at the right tide. I'm going to talk a little bit about tide. All the tuna for the last 3 years or 4 years or however long, 5 years, I don't even know anymore. The ones that come to the surface and bite lures that you can cast to them always do that best after a late morning or early afternoon slack tide. It could be a high tide, it could be a low tide. That slack tide, the bait comes to the surface. The tuna, it gets a lot less noisy in the ocean. The tuna can hear the bait, they find the bait, they get on it. And they'll usually stay up. Once they get on it, they'll stay up for hours. But if I'm out and I know that it's 6:30 in the morning, I see an area that's got bait, birds, maybe dolphins, maybe whales. I don't see any tuna. I'm like, well, I have a slack low tide at 11 a.m. I want to be back here. A slack high tide at 2:30. That's where I want to be. So by running out of Newport right to the 277, I've covered 3 spots: the 14-mile bank, the edge of the shipping lanes, which doesn't look like a lot, but I see a lot of fish here, and now the 277, where I'm in a position to glass up to towards the 152 or down towards the 209, and I've only covered 30 miles. So from there, if I'm going to run out, if my plan is to go to the East Butterfly, the next obvious spot would be either the 289 or the 181, 182 ridge. So from the 277 to the 289 is 18 miles. There's usually not a lot between there, so I'll just run there full speed and I'll slow it down to 289, glass around, look around, see if I see any birds, any signs of life, bait, temperature changes, whatever, nothing, keep going. Now I'm going to slide down to the Clemente Ridge, that thing I showed in the first picture where that water speeds up. And I found in my experience, you can tell when the current is running uphill because it gets very rough on the ridge. And the rougher it is on the ridge, it seems like the more life is there. You'll see rizzos, you'll see whales, birds, dolphins, bait, all that stuff early in the morning. That's a good sign that there's going to be tuna there later. They're not always there, but they can be. So here, 15 miles later, I'm at that ridge. And I don't go right up to the island because I found that most of the stuff is on the lower half or lower 2/3 of that ridge. So from there, I'll run down to the 43, and that's 16 miles of looking in prime area. I've got a guy in glasses. I am looking for anything, any sign of anything, I'm going to look at. I mean, I found fish 5 miles off to the side, either side of this ridge, depending on what's happening on any given day. But you got to follow birds and pay attention to what's going on. So let's say I've run down there 16 miles, 243, haven't seen anything. Now I've got a 16-mile run out to the East Butterfly. So I've driven all over and I've covered dozens of, I'm going to say a dozen potential spots or areas, miles of potential spots and areas where I could have saw fish. And I've run 96 miles as opposed to 83. So I've run an extra 13 miles. And instead of driving the straight shot where I covered the 181 and the 43, I've covered the 14, the shipping lanes, the 277, the 289, the entire Clemente Ridge, the 43, and the Butterfly for extra 13 miles. And this is really the key. You know, I cover a lot of water. We'll run 200 miles a day when we're out looking. But the option is you can run from San Diego there 52 miles, which is, 41 less miles. But you're driving on the same track that everybody else is, and you're running over nothing on your way there, really, very little. Not a really good option. So I'm going to check my questions again here real quick. I apologize. Okay, so I have a question about when I see a temperature change. What questions do anytime I see a hard temperature change, I will slow down and look. I will look, and it doesn't take long. It takes a minute. If you got a guy in technostavies or in gyros, you can scan 360 in 1 or 2 minutes. You know, the guys that are been holding it can stop, take a leak, and by the time they're done, you can keep going. I had a question about red tide. You know, red tide is just it's just food for bait fish, and it's around right now, and it will go away, and we'll be back to our normal program. That's the end of that questions right now. So the all right, so I run the 96 miles to East Butterfly. You know, for me, it's very rare to go that far because it's just a long way to go to the center console. But because I took that track, that's not the only option. It's like, yeah, those covered those banks, but you have other solutions here. So instead of let's say I have a partial SST shot or chlorophyll chart, and I know that the water up towards Catalina is not looking good. I can run down to the 181 out of Newport, and I'm running to a piece of structure that's going to have a current break on it, potentially, if I can't see much. So it's 45 miles to the 181 from Newport Beach. It's a lousy angle going home if it's windy in the afternoon. Trust me on that one. But you can get a good view. So 45 miles. Now I can run that whole ridge in 16 miles as far as I want to go anyway. If I don't see anything between the 181 and almost the 182, I don't need to go all the way to the 182 to know. I can run a mile, I can run 2 miles. If it doesn't look good, if I don't see any signs of life at all, I can cut out earlier. But at 16 miles, we run the whole thing almost. And I can go through Clip the Corner, which is a known spot. I can go down to the bottom edge of the 43 and be at the Butterfly in 29 more miles, and I've run 91 miles. So I've run 8 miles further than I would have in a straight line. But I covered, I ran across the edge of the 267, 209 I covered. I looked at the 312, which isn't too far, 181, 182, the corner, the 43, and the Butterfly, and pardon my dog's barking there, and 8 miles more than I would have been in a straight line. So the reason I'm talking about all of this is because the guys who run right to where they've been yesterday are. Hold on 1 second here. Stop it. Spike. Sorry, I have a very excited dog that loves to bark. I hope it's not over that too much, but let's check in. Is the dog too loud? I don't give me okay, we're good. I mean, I'm looking at questions here. Okay. Okay, I'm getting a few questions here that I'm going to answer really quick. So what do you drop if you see birds and fish on the meter? If you guys have bait, you can stop and chum. If you're marking fish or try doing that. The last few years, bluefin tuna that have been around, they're really not, if you see them on the meter, they're not going to bite anything. If these fish are 100 feet down, you're probably not going to catch them. I've tried dropping jigs on them and all the other stuff, and the amount of effort you put into doing that it's a pretty low rate of return, Marty. So If I see birds and fish on the meter and there's no signs of activity on the surface, I will come back there when the tide is slack and hopefully find some fish that are up. Or I will look around the area with my binoculars to see if I can find some fish that are up nearby. So there's a question about temperature breaks. Will I meter on the warmer or colder side? What I do is I don't so much meter on the warmer or colder side. I look for signs of life along the current break, and if there's birds and things like that, it doesn't really matter. And especially with these bluefin tuna. I mean, Matt and I a few years ago were running into the 289, and we found a spot of fish in between the 277 and 289 on that same course that I had just stopped to go to the bathroom, and he didn't even pick up binoculars. He's all, "What's that off in the distance?" And I said, all I saw was whitewater. He's like, "You think those are tuna?" I said, "I don't know. We're gonna go over there." And as we approached, I said, "Yeah, if those are tuna, we're in trouble." And it ended up we were. It was just straight 200-pound fish. But these fish were in such dirty water that when I pulled up, the fish were down, and I saw the scales in the water and all the triplets. I could not for the life of me associate that with that potentially being tuna until another spot came up, and we went 0 for 300, 200-pound fish. But those fish were in water that looked like a harbor. And I had a fish Clemente last year that in water so dirty that I couldn't eat. The fish was 3 feet from gap. I couldn't see it. So with warm, cold, clean, dirty, bluefin don't really mind. They go where the bait fish is. And the bait fish will normally be on a dirtier side of the break and often on a colder side of the break. So that's where more plankton is. So if you see good conditions but nothing on the surface, is it worth putting jigs in while waiting for a tide, or just keep driving? I don't put the jigs in. I know some guys like to troll. I know some guys like to just, everything I'm doing is casting. I've only got a certain amount of casts in me on any given day. I'd like most of those to be at fish that I have a chance of catching. If I see good conditions but nothing on the surface, I will note where that area is and plan to be back there at or after the tide if I don't find anything that's currently up feeding. What it sounds like for these tuna lately, the ones that are catching in San Diego, they are biting sardines and stuff. So if you're marking fish and you find a school close to the surface, you can throw some chum and put some baits back and see if you can catch them. But something about that, when you're marking fish, we have the meter set to 200 feet. If you see fish that are more than 100 feet down, they're not going to bite anything in my experience. If they're between 100 feet and the surface, they might bite your, I'm not a kite guy, so I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination on that. But most of the kite guys, I think, are looking for fish that are in the top 100 feet of the water column. I would imagine that guys fishing bait or anything else are looking for fish that are in the top 100 feet of the water column. And one of the things is when you see these meter marks, a good example is we got fish off Cat Canyon on the backside of Catalina last year, or was that last year? I don't even know anymore. Maybe the year before. The year before. We pulled up and we saw a foamer of tuna that we weren't sure if they were dolphin or tuna. By the time we got there, they were down. I found a spot of shearwaters that was sitting on something, and I accidentally had the meter set at 100 feet, thinking it was a 200. I just clipped something at the bottom of the screen. We scrolled down to 200. And once I did, I saw 100 plus feet of giant tuna that were under those shearwaters, just over 100 feet down. And we were about half an hour away from the tide. So I said, this area looks great. I just saw something come up momentarily. I'm marking these fish. I'm going to stay with these shearwaters. The shearwaters ended up taking off, and I lost track of fish. I've got side imaging on my boat, which a lot of you guys as fish finders have now. I cranked the side imaging out to 500 feet on each side and idled around in there and relocated that school of bluefin. And they were down deep, and I stayed near them. I just kept nudging them. I'd lose them. I'd do a circle with the boat, and I'd relocate them. I'd follow them for probably half a mile. And while those fish did not come back up for me, a couple hundred yards away, another giant school came up. We went 1 for 3 on 200-pound fish on poppers. But had we not seen, we investigated what we thought might have been fish. It might have been dolphin too. I don't know. But we found shearwaters, drove over to them, marked tuna, followed those tuna marks with our side imaging and got on them. And, you know, the shearwaters are a great indicator. Those are those blackbirds that sit underwater all wrapped up. They're very lazy. So they don't want to swim around a lot. They're always going to be where the bait is. And one of the things I've noticed over the years of fishing these tuna is that if shearwaters, if you drive up with your boat and they scatter and fly away and don't come back, they're not on tuna. If those shearwaters take off and circle around and go back to where they were, you need to go back and take a hard look at that area because they're on fish. And a lot of times you can go through and meter around in there and you're going to find tuna underneath those shearwaters. And even if they're not up, you can say, hey, you know, I've got 2 hours until the tide. I'm going to be back here. And I've caught them like that as well. So, so what's your favorite bait? I exclusively throw the Rapala Subwalker and the Yoseberry Hydro Pencil. And that's just, I'm a topwater guy. Both very simple baits. I've got YouTube videos. You can look at it on VD Outdoors. Just go to my YouTube channel. You can find them on there. Very simple baits. If they're not biting artificial, I really don't fish for them. I have a question about lured spreader bars. They work great in certain situations, as do dredgers and things like that. The guys are using for marlin and things like that, but it's really not my cup of tea. I don't really like to drag things behind the boat. So here's the question: describe slack tide. That's not very obvious, and maybe not everybody's aware of that term. The slack tide is when the tide is coming in or going out. When it peaks, there's a short period of no tidal movement at the top of that bell curve or the bottom of it before it starts running the other direction. That's considered a slack tide, and I've heard a lot of arguments about it. But one of the things that's always stuck with me, and I have no way to know if this is true, is that the ocean is a very noisy place. A lot of water moving, water hitting these underwater structures, rising up, speeding up, slowing down, all these other things with tidal movements. When the tide stops, for a moment, everything gets quiet. And bait fish, a lot of times that swim near the surface, do not, their movements are hidden by the noisiness of the water. And fish can locate bait schools easier during a slack tide. And that's marlin guys think about this all the time. Is that, when if you're fishing marlin in Southern California, the time that really be in the right place at the right time is on the slack tide, because that's when the fish come to the surface and feed. Be it one biting a jig, be it a tailor, be it any fish that's gonna be feeding on the surface will be feeding during that slack tide. The tuna are the same way. So they use an opportunity to get on this bait, which comes to the surface. They start feeding up high, and they will continue to do it until the bait's gone or they're full. So that slack tide, be it a high tide or a low tide, late morning seems to be the indicator for surface activity. And I'm sure there's guys who are on here like, oh, I got my own opinions. This is just my opinions of it. But if you have a tide change after 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. seems to be the magic number for me. If there are tuna around that are going to feed on a surface, they're going to do it at that time, and they will continue to do it for sometimes an hour or two, sometimes the entire day. So on a 91-mile run, what is the length overall on the boat? It's a 24-foot Everglades center console 243 bay boat we run, or my 226 Cayman. We've had it. Both boats have over 200 miles of range, and so that's something we should talk about here. When I'm driving and doing all these runs, I'm not driving slow. I am driving at 30 plus miles an hour through dead water, and when I get to an area that I want to look at, a bank, a ridge, whatever, I'm pulling my boat back to 20 knots or less. 18 knots seems to be the sweet spot. I got a guy in the glasses. I've got myself driving and looking one way. If I got a third guy, he's looking the other way. So the guy with the glasses always looks long, and the guy driving always looks short. Sometimes the guy driving, looking short, will find everything, while the guy with the glasses sees nothing. It's just the way it works out. But if you're driving, so back to my thing here. If I'm making this 30-mile run from Newport to the 277, I am running 30 miles an hour through all this to the 14. I've got my eyes open, but I'm not really, I have to see something pretty dramatic. I'm not, staring daggers at anything, unless I start to see signs of life. If I start to see signs of life anywhere in there, I'm slowing it back to 18 or 20 knots, and I'm cruising. And that speed, I'm looking hard. If I get to the 14, I'm slowing down as I'm getting to the bank. At some point, I will stop. I will blast around the whole thing. I will speed it back up. If I start to see life at the end of the shipping lanes, which is this little pink corner right here, I'll slow it back down to 18, 20 knots, then fast again to my next spot. And by doing that, you can, at a boat that runs 30 miles an hour, you can be at the fishing grounds, having looked at everything in just over 3 hours. You leave the dock at, 5:30. By 8:30, you're at the East Butterfly. And you'll know when you get there if you want to stay or not. And immediately you start looking on the way back. And then, I showed this thing about running down there, and then, theoretically you would make a straight shot back. But if you don't make a straight shot back, now I'm running from there to the 182, up to the 181, across 209, and that backwards. You just make decisions while you're on the water with that. But covering water is key. And, this is a giant haystack with very few needles that are widely spaced. But there are indications of where those needles might be, and it comes down to contour changes creating current breaks, which create either temperature changes or chlorophyll changes, both of which aggregate bait. On any given day during the summer, even if there's no chart to look at. So let's back up here. So let's say this is the SST chart right here, and I'm looking at Newport's not on here, but I got a hard break here at the 277. I got another one here at the 289. I've got a little bit of break outside of Clemente Ridge. I got one down here by the 181, and a little one outside of the 43. Those breaks are there regardless of whether or not you can see them on your SST chart through the cloud cover or whatever, as are the chlorophyll breaks. You can go there and you can run all the likely places that these breaks will be and do a visual observation. Did the water change color? Is the water warmer or colder? Or is there bait here? Is there birds here? Is there mammals here? Am I marking fish? Am I seeing signs of forage? I mean, these are the things that you have to do on your own because you're not driving to a straight shot to the East Butterfly where they caught them. So instead of doing the work, so whoever found them at the East Butterfly did all that work ahead of you. And if you want to just go there, you're going to go where they bit yesterday. You're going to go and fish yesterday's fish, which, hey, it might be great. It might work out for you every trip next year. Or it might end up that every time you go somewhere, there's a million boats, nobody's catching anything. It's just a nightmare. So that's why I would rather go my own way. I had a question about what gear we're using to catch a 200-pound tuna on the popper. Well, we lost one boat side on a Penn Fathom 25 N star drag and an 8-foot RCLB 80M, and then we got another one on a Penn Fathom 42 speed and a range head RCJB 70X8, so 7 and 8 foot casting rods. So many captains say the current is very important. It is in certain situations when you're fishing inshore stuff, but I wouldn't say so much offshore. But currents really matter in how they relate to one another. I had a question about what kind of a retrieve am I using with a subwalker. I am doing a sweep of the rod, a long sweep of the rod, and then really get my slack as fast as I can. John, I highly recommend watching my YouTube video. It's under Eric Landisfine, my name. There's one about how to artificial lures for bluefin tuna that would really be helpful because I could actually show you what I'm doing. Okay, so here's the question. This is why do the shipping lanes aggregate fish? This is pretty interesting. Let me get to them here. There are spots in the ocean that have no significance whatsoever. I mean, you can look here, the shipping lanes have very little, the edge of the shipping lanes here have very little bottom contour that would indicate that there would be fish there. But what I found in my experience is there is a line of kelp patties. If there's kelp patties anywhere, they're running from the 209 up to the 277, right through the shipping lanes to the Avalon Bank. And what I think happens here is that the water comes up the Catalina Ridge, and the water coming up and that hits the 267 of the 14 funnel current through that area, which happens to coincide with the shipping lanes. And yeah, you know, it's so predictable that that is one of the spots I will always look at, whether I'm fishing tuna or whether I'm fishing marlin. The outside end of the shipping lanes, this section here from that buoy down, seems to always hold fish. And if you see me in there, please give me some space. But I like that area a lot. Okay, so here, better to fish in the full moon or no moon, or does it matter? So anybody's launched a boat in the last, I fished twice in the last couple of days, and the water at the launch ramp is so exponentially low that, I mean, you almost hit the back of a whole truck in the water, you get the boat off the trailer. Big moon, neither full or no, means bigger tide movements. More extreme tide movements mean more water movement. More water movement means more pronounced currents, which means more pronounced aggregations of bait when these currents interact with one another. Regarding the full moon and the new moon, on the full moon, fish will often feed at night because they can see, and bait fish tend to follow the moon. So fish move on the full moon because it's bright at night. Bait fish are on the surface. They're feeding on those bait fish are on the surface, who are usually, and this is a theory that my friend Sean Morgan shared, I can't dispute it. Bait fish will follow the moon, the light of the moon, to feed on the little microscopic stuff they feed on. The game fish will feed on those bait fish, which are also traveling in that direction. And I'll tell you, marlin, tuna, everything else, they tend to make bigger moves during lunar cycles, during the full moon or the new moon. Well, mostly on the full moon with that. But things change. I mean, it's not, if they haven't been biting and the full moon comes, they might be biting. If they've been biting and the full moon comes, they might be biting somewhere else. Or they might be really good on the back side of the moon or show up. It's just I think it has to do with tides, and I think it has to do with, especially on the full moon, fish movements with the moon. So I know that's not a really complete answer, but really all I have time for here, because I'm running kind of out of time here. I have another thing about the chlorophyll break. Are you on the clean side or dirty side? I'm going to be on the side with the birds and the bait fish and the active fish. Some it's clean, some it's dirty. But if you drive along that break, you're likely to find fish on one side or the other. Don't just discount the dirty side or the cold side. All right, so when you see bluefin up on the surface, how are you approaching the school? Running up head and waiting, or just crashing in full speed to get in one cast before they go down? I don't do either of those. If I see through the binoculars some bluefin feeding on the surface I want to cast the lure to, it's no rush. If you don't have a bunch of other boats, which I try to never do, you have all the time in the world. They don't see you coming from a mile away and going running high. Those fish will continue to do whatever they're doing. So I will run towards those fish, and I want to get to them as quickly as possible, but I'm not getting right on them. I'll pull it back maybe 500 yards away from the fish and take a minute, a literal minute, which is a lifetime when tuna are up on the surface crashing, and look at what these fish are doing. Do they have a bait well pushed up tight? Are they chasing something? Or are they moving in a direction? So when they're on these anchovies and you see this brown ball in the middle, a bunch of tuna ripping through it, I'll drive right up to that and cast. But I'm going to idle in. I'm not going to race up there and have my jig. Because one of the things when you race up, by the time you make your cast, whoever's in the bow winding in, it's just winding in slack line because the boat's sliding forward so fast. So when I'm sliding on a school of tuna, I'm going up in gear. And it might take you 2 or 3 minutes to get up on that school. But if they're up, they're not going to go down because you're coming into them, unless you're competing with other boats. If I'm watching if these fish are moving and I'm seeing that they're going in a direction, I'm watching the birds. And I'm particularly watching the terns, and I'm watching the shearwaters. I can't tell you how many times I've watched a school of fish up that's up and down, and there's a bunch of seagulls on. It turns and everything. There are 2 or 3 turns that are hauling ass ahead of that, looking hard at the water. I'm going for those turns. I'm not going for those fish because I'm going to be where those turns are going to be by the time my boat gets there, because that fish is going that way. Same thing with the shearwaters. If you see a line of shearwaters diving away from a school of fish that's crashing or whatever, those shearwaters are chasing the bait that those fish are chasing below them. So what the tuna are doing under the water, the shearwaters are doing above it. So I'm going to watch the direction those shearwaters are going. I'm going to race up ahead of them, and I'm going to go stop in line with them and a jig in the air before they get to where I'm at. And so many times those tuna will just come crashing right behind them, or you'll just see them flashing behind them. So take your time, don't rush in there. And if you're fishing away from other boats, which is very possible, you have all the time in the world. Okay, so is there anything specific you found on the backside of Catalina when you carried a 200-pound bluefin last year? Yeah, there had been fish at Desperation Reef, and they disappeared. And there was good water up on the backside of Catalina, and a strong uphill current, and that seemed like a likely spot that they would go to. And what the funny part about it is that as it turned out, after that day, I talked to a friend of mine who had been there the week before, and had the same thing. And he was like, "Oh, those are my fish," you know. So it's pretty funny, but those fish will do that. You know, it's you can predict. So let me go back a slide here for a second. Talking about why are fish where they are? Let's say, for example, it's just a theoretical situation. This isn't a really good example. This is a little far apart here, but bear with me because I don't have it really set up right. If I saw a temperature break like this on this ridge right here, and let's say they were catching fish anywhere along it, and those fish were gone, I would look for similar temperature breaks that have contours in line with that. And while this is pretty far away from where that is, so what I have here is I have a ridge that runs up, and I have a contour change that runs all the way up almost to the 277. And hey, I got a similar edge right there. That would be definitely worth taking a look at. I would like it better if I saw this edge closer down here by like the 209 or in this area. But, it's just a picture. But, you could say, and again, this is a probably 50-mile stretch right here. So if there was fish being caught down at the bottom of this on this edge, there's no reason there shouldn't be fish all along that edge. Or there couldn't be fish all along that edge. So you just keep driving along. So, so I had a question about clarifying the best area to look for fish on the chlorophyll chart. On a chlorophyll chart, the darker the blue, the cleaner the water. Any other color, green is dirtier water, yellow, orange is dirty, red is really dirty. So this is much further out over here outside of Clemay than anyone would ever want to go. But a change from dark blue to green like that is a pretty hard edge. And that just shows you that there's two currents interacting. And like I talked about up here, it's this eddy of water. The edges of this are definitely going to attract bait fish. It's going to be this is a hard line. So basically, a color break or a current break becomes a piece of structure in the ocean, just like a kelp bed does, or a rock, or anything else, or a ridge. This is something that all these things have in common is that they aggregate bait fish. And tuna, yellowtail, marlin, calico bass, white sea bass, they all like to eat bait fish. So they're going to be where the bait fish are. And the bait fish are going to be where the plankton is. And the plankton is going to be on an edge of something. There's plankton scattered all over the ocean, but what happens is when two currents run against one another, it concentrates that. These red tides, we look at, you can have the break from clear water to red tide, and the bait fish is always going to be right on the edge of that. That's the highest concentration of plankton. So I hope that answers that question. How do I handle patties? So basically, this is pretty interesting. I still have a little bit of time here. This same current that these edges here that aggregate or that create these eddies also line up patties. There's well, I don't have a picture of it. Darn it. Maybe I do. Okay, so here at Catalina, this edge right here, this is notorious for having patties on it because the current runs right along this where the island meets the seafloor. So the island actually meets the seafloor in 3,000 feet of water. You don't think about it like that. The island doesn't end at the water line; it goes all the way up to 3,000 feet. But that line will have patties all along it. So if I'm looking for patties, I will look for things like that will line up those patties. The 181, 182 ridge, the Clementi ridge, the Catalina ridge up through the Avalon Bank. And when I look at patties, I will, if there's birds or whatever, I'll stop. And if I'm just driving by a patty and I'm in an area where I'm looking for patties, I will put on my side imaging out there a couple hundred feet. And I will drive about 100 feet away from that patty, and it's going to tell you if there's bait fish under it, or tuna, or yellowtail, or whatever. You'll see them on the side imaging. And the nice thing about that is, especially with Dorado and that kind of stuff, the fish aren't necessarily like living under the patty like a yellowtail would. Let's say it's going to be 100 yards off. So if you drive through your side imaging, you're basically covering a 300-foot swath of water. And if you see anything on it at all, it's worth checking out, because it's not going to be like, oh, that's a bait fish, that's a Dorado, that's a yellowtail. If you see life under that patty that's not tiny bait fish, stop and take a look. And you don't burn your whole day sitting there casting them. How many patties will I stop on until I give up on patty fishing? One. I mean, I have to see, if there's a patty and it doesn't have turns on it, or it doesn't have signs of life on it, or fish jumping around it, I'm really not going to stop unless I know that, hey, there's fish on patties. You can drive through, if you stop on every patty, you're never going to get anywhere. So it's usually pretty obvious. If you see one patty and you see some yellows on it, yeah, look at some more patties. If you look at a patty and it's dry and there's nothing under it, and you keep driving and the water temperature has not changed, the water clarity has not changed, nothing else has changed, the next patty is probably not going to have anything on it either. But if there's some birds on, if there's 5 dry patties and hey, there's 3 turns sitting on this one, and they start flying around looking in the middle of that pull up, then hey, give it a couple minutes. So how pronounced does the chlorophyll or temp break need to be in order to be worth checking out? What will happen when water temperature changes is, as you drive, let's say it's 65, then it's 65.1, then it's 65.2, then it's 65.1, then it's 65.3, then it's 65.4, then 65.3, then 65.5. That's not a temperature break. What a temperature break is, it's going to be, hey, it's 65.1. Okay, it's 65.6 in 100 feet. That's a temperature break. I don't care if it's a 0.3 degrees or 2 degrees. That means that there's a hard line where the temperature changed dramatically, which means that 2 different moving areas of water have hit each other. So it's like, imagine if there's it's a road basically. Traffic going one way is going at 65.1 miles an hour, and traffic the other way is going 65.5 miles an hour. There's going to be a hard line where those 2 things meet. It's not going to be spread out over 200 yards or a mile or things like that. That's just a slow break. A hard break will be, hey, wow, I just looked at the meter and it just jumped a half a degree. That's worth looking at. I have a question about marlin. Vidal, thank you for that question. I'm going to have to do a whole another webinar on that, go on for hours. All right. I don't. When you shut down your motors once, your engines once the approach is made. I never shut down the engine. Bluefin tuna do not know what a boat engine is. You know what is. We don't need to be silent with them. There's no sneakiness about it. You're going in. You're hoping to get bit on your first or second cast. I mean, a lot of times I'll have to bump ahead to keep on these fish. And that's something else too. Not everybody in the boat runs up the cast. I'll keep one guy on the wheel, usually me. I'll get somebody casting. If that person hooks up, I'll spin the boat so I can cast from the console, hang another one, and then we'll land both those fish. And if they're really up, I'll throw that rod in the rod holder and grab another rod and cast to hang a third or fourth. So we got a couple going on the rod holder. So we, if the spool goes down, we can limit out before we're done. There's no optimum temperature or bait for bait or plankton or any of those things. I've got fish in cold water. I've got fish in warm water. You want to look for the temperature changes on that day, the history of what it was as opposed to something else. There was times last year we're fishing bluefin where the water was almost 70 degrees, and then would roll over overnight to 63 degrees, and the fish would still bite. So if there's 60-degree water and 63-degree water somewhere else, and I would go to the 63-degree water. But if there's, it doesn't matter what the actual number is. It's just the changes we're looking for. Any tips on seeing patties that are really okay on stay with slide chop on the center console? No. Polarized glass is really all I can offer you. Okay, I'm getting more questions about the chlorophyll charts, and basically what it comes down to is we're really just looking for changes in chlorophyll, and any hard edge is likely to have bait on it because it means that there's two different colors of water running into each other. It's just like a temperature break. If there's a hard break, that means that there's conflicting currents. Because if water's all moving in the same direction, imagine if you dumped a gallon of motor oil into your swimming, not motor oil, but maybe black dye into your swimming pool. At first it's going to be all the same color, but as soon as it hits that water, it's going to eventually all the colors going to be the same water. But if you have a stream of it going into it, that's going to stay black and concentrated while the other water stays clear and a little bit offsetting. So that's the same thing that happens with chlorophyll or current, is that you have a conflict, two things moving in other directions, which is going to create a color break, a temperature break, and those are the things that aggregate plankton, which aggregate bait fish, which aggregate game fish. The kelps were not productive last year. Any pattern reason to explain this? No, I have none. Last year we were catching kelp patty yellowtail in January off Dana Point. Never saw another one. Yeah, so question about recording the webinar. It'll be on YouTube later on Navionics YouTube page. Do I fish yellowfin any differently than bluefin? When I'm fishing yellowfin, I'll look for dolphins a lot of times, but that's thing you troll in front of them or throw bait or whatever, and that's more of a technique specific thing I'll be covering in another webinar. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so what do you call it quits on a slow day? How long late do you stay on the water? I have a rule that I like to be a cocktail in hand back on the porch by 3 p.m. But if I fish through the morning tide and I don't see anything, if there's a late morning tide, let's say 11 o'clock, and I don't see anything, I'm not going to be out there for the late afternoon tide because I just don't have the interest in beating a dead horse that long. I have the luxury of fishing more often than a lot of guys do, so a lot of times I'll call it quits after the morning tide. And usually, during the summer, if the fish are biting, you usually find them by then. Is having a through-hole transducer essential for fishing offshore? Absolutely not. Trans amount's fine. If you can't mark it, then slow down to 5 knots and take a look. And if you can only mark up to 5 knots, you should probably take a look at how your transducer is positioned. So if you encounter a school of jumping tuna moving very fast, what's the best way to approach and get their attention? You need to figure out what the tuna are doing, what they're out. A lot of times we have situations where they'll be on whales or things and chasing bait, and they're going to be in a direction that they're going to be moving in. What I'll do is I will get well ahead of them so that I can have lures moving perpendicular to their direction of travel when they get to the lure. If you're casting where you see the tuna, you're not going to catch tuna. You have to. If anybody who's ever shot a duck or any kind of a bird knows, if you shoot it where you see the bird, by the time your shot gets there, the bird's gonna be gone. You need to lead them. Same thing with casting a lure. If I'm seeing fish moving fast, I'm gonna get way ahead of them and time my cast so that my lure is right in front of their faces when they're going by. So what map should I get from Navionics? The West Regions card works good. That's mostly what I run on my boat. The Southern California and Mexico Platinum card also works well, and it offers a little bit more options. But either of those maps will work fine for you. So I think that's all my questions. I think I've talked up all of my time here. So let me get to my thank you page finally. It's amazing how fast these things go. Uh-oh. So, oh, well, this isn't working out so good. I'm sure my boss who's watching this is going to laugh at my inability to. Oh, there we go. Well, there you can see it here, smaller. I want to thank you guys all. This is going to be on the Navionics YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing one or two more of these this year, talking about at least one more offshore thing. Maybe talking some more about techniques and stuff. I really thank you guys all for attending, and I had a good time. So thanks again.